All right, so good morning, ZivCon. Today's presentation is I can see an apple behind your windows, red teaming macOS environments. My name is Wojciech Reguła, and I'm a head of mobile security at Securing. I'm mostly focused on iOS and macOS application security. I also run a blog in my free time that's of course about Apple security, so if you'd like to read some more about it, feel free to visit it. The link is on the slide. Somebody of you may also know me from iOS Security Suite that I'm an author of. iOS Security Suite is a free Swift open source library that helps you making sure that your application is run on a secure iPhone or iPad. And recently, like for 1 year, we've started in securing a new service that is a macOS environment security verification. And on the right of the slide, you can see the conferences that I attended in the past. All right, so when I was creating this talk, I had an idea in my mind to provide a presentation about macOS red teaming that is like a typical red teaming presentation. I'd like, after this talk, to have in your minds a feeling that, oh, that's the very same attack scenarios that are present on Windows, but they also work on Macs. So that was the main idea that I'd like to incept to your minds, right? So we'll start from introduction, and then we're gonna compare Macs in corporate environments. Then I will share my thoughts on Mythic. That's a C2 framework for mostly for Macs. And when we will have everything set, our environment will be set up. We'll start from initial access, then persistence, and when we have the persistence, like standard data collection, lateral movement. And because I don't like giving talks without recommendations in the end, I'll give you some ideas on how to harden your macOS environments. All right, I know it's hard after the after party, but I'll try to move your hands. So the first question, raise your hands if there is at least one Mac in your companies. Oh, I would say like 70%. That's good. And the second question, raise your hand again if those Macs have access to your company's resources like other Windows machines. Okay, I would say like everybody who rose their hand in the first question rose their hand in the second question, right? Something. It only proves that this talk was correct in the assumptions. So why did I decide to make this talk? Because Macs are getting more common in corporate environments. Developers use them, UX guys, designers, managers, etc. There are companies like software houses or IT companies in general that have a large percentage of Macs in their environments. And the problem is that those Macs are usually not symmetrically secured compared to Windows machines, right? So we probably, if you have Macs in your company, you probably know that you know that, but there are sometimes people that tell me, Wojtek, I work in a huge bank, we don't have Macs. And I say, okay, but do you have an iOS application, for example, a mobile banking application? And they say, yes, we do have that. And I ask them, all right, so how is this application developed? Because you cannot compile an iOS application on Windows. So probably somewhere in the infrastructure you have Macs, and you probably even don't know about it. And if you have Macs in that company, are they symmetrically secured? Are they bound to the AD? Is SOC monitoring those Macs? So they are usually a blind spot. That's why I decided to make this talk. And what are the main problems that we determined after investigating some macOS environments in huge companies? So there were old and vulnerable macOS versions like everywhere. I even met recently a Mac that was not updated for 4 years, and it was used by a person who was responsible in that company for making payments to the employees. Yeah, the second problem is macOS system firewall is usually disabled. And that's because this default configuration Mac. So if you buy a brand new Mac, you configure it, you will see that the firewall is disabled by default. Anti-malware. Oh, I can see there is a delay between my laptop because I'm displaying other slides. Yeah, but I'm on the new slide for like 3 minutes. Already hacked, right? Try reconnect. That's Apple magic. That's what we call Apple magic.
Can you
Dobra. All right, so that was the slide that I was on. So yeah, I stopped on talking about malware. So do even Mac have viruses? Yes, they have. And there are a lot of types of malware on macOS. Even we have our ransomware. So yeah, there is malware on Macs. Standard users working on administrative accounts. That was everywhere because that's again the default configuration. If you create a new user, it automatically becomes an admin. Not even saying about application whitelisting. And one of the worst things in small and mid-sized companies, those Macs were not even enrolled to MDM, so the users could apply any policies they wanted to. All right, so now let's compare macOS environments. So typically, we have Windows, mostly Windows environments, when all the computers are bound to the AD. And there are Macs that also could be bound to the AD because there are native mechanisms in macOS that allow doing that. However, for example, if you bound your Macs to AD, you cannot enforce, for example, GPOs that are crucial, right, for laptop management. The second situation, that's the more common situation than the first one, is that you have AD in your infrastructure. However, those Macs are not directly bound to it, but you still want to use Kerberos, for example. So there is a neat plugin called Nomad that handles the Kerberos. So that's the second type of environments, of macOS environments. And the third one, the last one that I'm going to talk about, is the situation where there is no AD. We have, for example, a software house that this is a relatively new company, and they wanted to build their infrastructure without AD. So they have all the services in the cloud, and they use SSO, like for example Okta. So there is no AD bound. Okay, so with having those three setups in mind, let's take a look on the target, because as I told you at the beginning, I wanted to give you a presentation that is like typical red teaming presentation. We're gonna go from 0 to hero, so we're gonna hack this this kind of infrastructure. So we have a Mac that via OpenVPN connects to the company's intranet and gets access to Active Directory. Because of the Active Directory, it connects to Active Directory federational services. That what provides SSO, and in the end, the person that uses that Mac has access to Jira or Google Workspace. Let's imagine that the person that we're gonna hack uses also AWS, so there are somewhere on the Mac AWS keys stored. Regarding social media, administrators mostly do not hide them behind the SSO because it's kind of problematic, especially, for example, if you use marketing team, if you have marketing team that mostly uses their own personal accounts to manage your company's social media. That's why the social medias are usually not behind the SSO. So they have, like, for example, Firefox that connects to that social medias. That company also heard that using Signal is secure, so for communication purposes they use Signal. And there are also some protected documents in desktop or downloads or documents directory. So we have this target. So if we'd like to start a red teaming exercise, we have to have a C2. So I really recommend for macOS red teaming purposes using Mythic. That's really great, created by Cody Thomas. It's open source. And why I really like Mythic is that it has really extensive docs. So like everything the Mythic provides, you can read about it on the internet in the docs, which is really great. So let's take a look at demo. That's a default configuration of Mythic. So we log into operator. We're gonna use upfel, a standard JXA payload, and for the communication with the C2, we're gonna use standard unencrypted HTTP, but also Mythic provides HTTPS, of course, WebSockets, etc. I just wanted to keep it simple. So we are creating a new payload. We're gonna use upfel. We include all the commands to have all the features that it provides. We're gonna, as I told you, we're gonna connect via the HTTP. We set our IP address. And we create next. We have created the payload, and now we can download it. All right, but we have our payload, but then we have to somehow deliver it, right? So this is where the problems start. In recent years, Apple wanted to limit the applications that are downloaded directly from the internet because that was a really easy way to malware, to infect users. So they started requiring notarization. And what has to be notarized? So macOS applications, bundles like kernel extensions, disk images, or flat installer packages, those with the extension PKG. And what does it mean that the software has to be notarized? So notarization is a mechanism where you have a paid developer account. It's paid developer account. It's not that much because it's like $100 per year, but still you have to pay for it. So when you have a paid developer account, you create your application, you send it to Apple, and Apple confirms that this application is free of malware. That's of course an automate scan behind the Apple's infrastructure. So you can of course trick this scans to stop your malware, but that's not what we are gonna cover in this talk. For this talk, I just wanted you to know that there is a notarization mechanism. So if you want to create a dropper and you want to do it in legitimate way, let's say, it has to be notarized. So it will be sent to Apple and verified against malware. And what happens if you do not notarize your application? So when the user double clicks on the application right after it's downloaded from the internet, there will be a prompt that the application cannot be opened because the developer cannot be verified. So macOS will simply block it. So without the developer certificate, you are not able to deliver a legitimate payload. However, there are some solutions. So the first one is, of course, delivering a package file that is notarized. However, we risk our certificate being revoked by Apple, right? So in red teaming, we don't want to risk it. There are services that use stolen developer certificates for that purposes, but yeah, if you do internal red teaming, you probably do not want to use stolen certificates, right? So the first idea. The second idea is a technique commonly used by malware. So these two screenshots are from real malware, and what it does, it's delivering the dropper inside of the DMG file. The DMG file doesn't have to be signed, doesn't have to be notarized. So the only thing that has to be notarized is the application it's inside of the DMG. But the big plus of delivering DMG is that you can set a custom background, which is a PNG image. And this PNG image, as you can see, provides an instruction to victims. So in the first part, there is a DMG with the unsigned package file. And on the right, you can see that there's an instruction to right-click on that and press open. And that's the mechanism that bypasses notarization requirements. There will be additional prompt that this application has been downloaded from the internet and cannot be verified, so you make the user accept the risk of getting infected. But come on, when you're doing red teaming, you know that this prompt doesn't work, right? Okay, so there is also a third way, but it requires us from us having a 0 day. So the mechanism that verifies the notarization on the user's end it's called gatekeeper. There are, of course, 0 days for that. I've even found one, as you can see on the slide. However, it still requires having 0 day. And the last way that I'm going to share during this talk is infection via Microsoft Office macro, and that's what you are probably used to. So on macOS, there are whitelisted extensions that doesn't have to be notarized, because it would be really dumb if you download, for example, a picture from the internet, you double click on it and you have a prompt, oh, this picture has not been signed by the real developer, right? So it would be really dumb. So there is a whitelist that bypasses the gatekeeper requirements, and one of these examples is docs file. So you deliver a Word document with macro, you double click on it, and there will be no gatekeeper bypass. However, it's not that easy. So how does it look like from the inside? So on macOS, we have a Visual Basic subroutine that's called auto open. So right after user accepts macros on in the document that they are about to open, this macro is being automatically called. And usually we use maxscript function, and what maxscript does is spawning a shell like bash or ZSH. So in this example, we download from our C2 server the payload, the app.js. We use hmode on it. And with OSA script, with specifying language to JavaScript, we run this totally not a virus JavaScript file. But that's not the end of the macro story, as Microsoft Word on macOS is sandboxed. So we get a code execution on Macs that doesn't have to be notarized, so you don't have to send this payload to Apple. However, yeah, this is sandboxed code execution. So this is not what we'd like to have, right? Because we don't have still access to users' directories, which is not really good for us. But there is a bypass for it. Madhav shared a really cool technique that makes you able to escape the word sandbox. However, it requires you to reboot your machine. So you infect the user, you create let's say a sandbox escape, you start to persist on that machine, but this unsandboxed code won't be executed until the user reboots their Mac. So, you know, it's from one side it's good, but from the other side, we usually during red teaming don't have time to wait for the user to reboot their Macs, right? But I don't know, what was the last time when you rebooted your Mac? I do it only when I update my computer. Is that also your case? Yeah, so that's useless mostly, this bypass, right? Maybe if your company has automated update process and you know that there will be an update which will be forced by GPOs or other policies, and right before the update you start infecting users, maybe that makes sense, but in general it doesn't. However, we have our own 0 days. So during this talk I will present a demo of my macOS sandbox escape vulnerability. Unfortunately, it's still a 0 day. Apple didn't fix it on time, so I'm sorry, without code, just the demo. So here we have the document file. That's a regular file downloaded from the internet, regular Word file downloaded from the internet with this macro. So let's the demo start. The user double clicks on it. It has to enable macros. As you can see, the terminal was spawned. If we do, of course, don't need to spawn it, but I wanted to show you that it worked. And as we have the code execution, let's check if it's really unsandboxed. So we verify the user. It runs with my user's permissions. In Mythic, we just spawn shell here. And then we use ls to list current users. Let's wait a while. So yeah, our infected machine responded with 2 users, what means that we have our code unsandboxed because we were able to list users, right? So yeah, that was the 0 day. But I'm sorry, no details this time. And by the way, it's not a 0 day only for Microsoft Office. It's a 0 day for macOS sandboxing system. So it bypasses all kinds of sandboxes on Mac. All right, so we have our code unsandboxed and executed on the victim's machine. So now we have to somehow persist. And there are many techniques like launch agents, launch daemons, login items. These 3 are commonly used by malware. Cron jobs, login logout hooks, authorization plugins, but there are many more, like 30 plus techniques. And they are well documented on my friend Chaba's blog, which link you have in the end of the slide. All right, so now let's try to persist with Mythic. So there's a command persist launch, and we will be creating a launch agent. So again, we start with the parameters that will be passed to this launch agent. So we want to run an OSA script to run our JS payload, and we have to somehow point to the payload that was saved. We start with dot because on Mac it works exactly the same like it works on Linux. So if you start with dot, that file will be hidden. We set a custom label, and in a while, Mythic will return the result that the file has been written to the launch agents directory. Okay, so we have our launch agent already there. Now we have to load it. So after a user reboots the machine or kills the process, it will be automatically spawned. So with launchctl load, we provide the path. And in a moment, we will see that there will be another active callback. Yeah. So as you can see, we have another active callback. And recently, Apple pushed their new macOS beta, which is macOS Ventura, that will be available in this fall. And they made some changes to the operating system. And now if you go to system settings and go to general, you will see launch agents, launch daemons, and login items that are installed on the machine. So this technique, the launch agent technique, will become more noisy because user will be able to, not from the command line, but from the user interface, verify what launch agents are registered. So this technique probably will change in the future. But as I told you, there are a lot of techniques to persist on macOS, and Apple covers, like for now, 4 techniques maybe that will be displayed here. So we have unlimited methods to stealthy persist on Mac still. All right, so we have our unsandboxed code execution. We know that the persistence is provided. So let's get back to our target, because now we want to attack the services installed on the machine. So what we are interested in, of course, VPN credentials, of course, AD credentials, but also signal messages, browser cookies, keychain entries, AWS and other cloud keys, and desktop documents files. Let's start from the OpenVPN. So OpenVPN saves its profiles that you install in it as a flat file without any additional protections. So if in your profile there are all the user's credentials that are required to connect to your internal network, it's over. However, it's not a really common case. Usually the profiles contain certificates, etc. But user has to log in with their login and password or something else in the prompt that will be displayed during the connection. So we have to we have this profile, but we also will need to have the user login and password. So how to do that with OpenVPN on Mac? As I told you, there is a notarization process. So OpenVPN, as it is an application downloaded from the internet, it has to be notarized. And notarization requires, of course, the anti-malware checks, but also requires the developers to harden the runtime of the application they distribute. And hardening runtime nowadays mitigate code injection vulnerabilities. However, there are special entitlements that will make this hardened runtime not really hardened, and code injection attacks will be still possible. And OpenVPN deliberately, like on purpose, implements those two these entitlements. And the first one is allow DILT environment variables, what allows us performing an attack like LD preload on Linux. So you can provide a dynamic library that will be loaded to the process context. And the second one is disable library validation. So this library doesn't even have to be signed. So we can inject to OpenVPN. So when we can inject to the OpenVPN, you can, for example, use my universal application keylogger. And what's the idea behind this universal keylogger is that generally, if you'd like to listen for keystrokes on macOS, you will need a special permission from the user. So you have to register to listening to all keystrokes to all applications, which of course has implications on user security and privacy. So Apple decided to make an architectonical decision to, when you start listening for all keystrokes on the machine, there will be a special prompt. And you want to avoid that. So this keylogger, what this keylogger does, it's a dynamic library which injects to a process, and it only gets the keystrokes from the OpenVPN. So there will be no additional prompt because a developer may decide to get the keystrokes information when, for example, they develop a game, right? Because they want to have control of what keystrokes are sent to the application. So that's the code. It's publicly available on GitHub. So feel free to use it. So with this technique, on the first screenshot, you can see that we were able to, with the DILT insert libraries, we were able to inject to OpenVPN without any additional permission, no root, no anything more. And then on the second screenshot, this keylogger is really simple. It just logs any keystroke that was pressed. So, as you can see, a recorded string password. So we were able, without any additional permission, to inject to OpenVPN and listen for the user's credentials. Okay, so we have the access to the VPN. So now let's focus on Nomad and Active Directory. So Nomad saves your AD credentials to macOS Keychain, which is good. That's the storage developers are supposed to store their secret in. Like on macOS, in iOS, and Apple TV and other Apple devices, Keychain is the place where you want to have your credential, your secret data stored in. However, the Keychain has a flaw, and Apple knows about it, that allows getting from it entries without any additional prompt, root access, or user's password. And I've even documented it on my blog. So if you're interested in this topic, feel free to visit the Stealing macOS Apps Keychain Entries post. And especially for my new macOS Red Teaming series, I've created a Nomad credential stealer tool that is, of course, again, open source and free to use, which will use this tricky keychain flow to take the keychain entries. So in the Nomad case, these entries will be your AD login and AD password. So again, without any additional prompt, without root permission, you run this tool, and if somebody uses Nomad, it gets the AD credentials. So yeah, we have access to the OpenVPN, we have our credentials, and in most cases, in such an infrastructure, we will have access, because we have AD credentials, we will have access to Active Directory Federation services, and because it's an SSO, the company's resources are now available to us. All right, so now let's focus on Signal messages. Is Signal secure? That's a question to you. Huh? You hope so? I hope so too. But Signal is a really good messenger. I personally use it. However, as Signal claims, they only provide security for transit. So they don't care about your endpoint security. However, the Signal database that you add on Mac is encrypted. The messages are stored in an SQLite database, which is encrypted. However, what about the key? The key is stored in a flat file that you can access without, again, any additional permissions. So you take the database, you go to library application support signal config JSON, you provide the key that's marked on the red to the DB browser, for example, and you have access to all the Signal messages without any additional permission. For other Signal implementations, I know that on Windows it worked the same. I don't know how it works now. So I will repeat the question. The question was if on other platforms Signal works the same. And as far as I know, on Windows it worked the same. And on Linux probably also. But that's a presentation about Mac, so on Mac it's in flat file. All right, so we have access to the company's resources, we have access to Signal. Let's now focus on Firefox. So Firefox stores saved logins and passwords in an encrypted form. So it is encrypted. However, if master password is not set, and that's the default configuration, those credentials can be dumped without root. Again, any additional permissions. And there's even a tool, this time not coded by me, but by Unode, Firefox Decrypt. It's really simple. Let me show you a demo. So we run Python. We choose the profile that we want to dump. And yeah, all the credentials saved in the Firefox are dumped without any additional permission. Okay. So that's the situation we have now. And let's go to the TCC. So if you have iPhones or Macs and you install an application, a new application, like for example Microsoft Teams or a browser, and you join a video call, and at the first time you will see a prompt that this application wants to access your camera, and you have to click on that prompt, right, in order to give the application access. And this mechanism on Mac and iOS is called TCC. So on the screenshot you can see that I tried to list address book from the terminal, and Mac has displayed me a prompt that the terminal would like to access your contacts. And what's really good about TCC is that Apple wanted to make sure that there is a clear user consent on doing it. So even if you, for example, have root, you cannot bypass this prompt, because Apple wanted to know that there is a user that clicks on the prompt before opening your camera. And each macOS huge update, Apple adds new resources that are protected by TCC, so like desktop, documents, downloads, camera, microphone, screen sharing, contacts, automation, Bluetooth, photos, and a lot of stuff is now protected by the TCC. So yeah, on macOS you are not a god if you have root. So let's confirm it with Mythic. So again, let's run a shell. And we're gonna list, for example, desktop. We schedule a task, and you will see the prompt of user doesn't allow on it, and you will see that we have an error that operation is not permitted. Yeah, so as I told you, accessing desktop documents, microphone, etc., and other sensitive resources will spawn a prompt. But the good thing is that there are tons of TCC bypasses. And last year, I was co-speaking a presentation on Black Hat US in Las Vegas about bypassing macOS privacy mechanisms. We found like 20 TCC bypasses, but yeah, still, they are all now fixed. Apple pays for the TCC bypasses in their bug bounty program, so there is a lot of pressure on securing TCC. So you can of course find your own 0-day, but that's kind of problematic. So we will find another way, which is abusing applications that are already installed on your Mac machines. And typically, I also made a lot of blog posts about bypassing TCC, but for example, most Electron applications are now vulnerable to code injections and those, because we will be executing code in the Electron apps context, we will have all the permissions that were already granted to those applications. So for example, let's imagine you want to access camera on your victim's machine, and that victim uses in their company Microsoft Teams. So we can expect that those Microsoft Teams have the camera, screen sharing, and recording already granted, right? So we can inject to Microsoft Teams and use its permissions to bypass the TCC. However, there is even more. There is even a better trick that works in macOS environments, because Macs are usually managed via the SSH. And because the SSH is used for administrative purposes, the remote login, usually on those Macs, have the allow full disk access for remote users. I will show it to you. So that's the problem. That's the checkbox that is usually checked on the macOS machines in huge companies' environments. And if the shell has full disk access, it means that the administrator, because it's an administrator, right, can do like almost everything on the Mac machines. What's really interesting, like there is no TCC when you have full disk access. This shell can access your desktop, spawn a camera, etc., without any additional prompt. But yeah, that's for administrators, right? However, there's a trick. Let's imagine that we don't have user's password to the victim's machine. We have only the code execution that's unsandboxed. We have the persistence already achieved, but we want to access that SSH. How we can do this? Do you have any idea? Once again? Drop SSH. That's a good idea. However, there will be another SSH that will be not the system SSH, so the full disk access for that SSH will not be granted. Yes. Yeah. So when we are a user, we can add our own key to authorized keys, right? To the SSH authorized keys and SSH to localhost without providing a password. So let me show you a demo. So yeah, we go to desktop. The operation is not permitted because of the TCC. However, let's create our own SSH key again, our own SSH key. As you can see, we provide empty passphrase. Then we copy the ID that we've created to the authorized keys. We set up the permissions of it. And now using SSH and the user's account, we SSH to localhost. All right, so we have the SSH session. And now if we go to desktop, you will see that we can access it without raising TCC because of the full disk access permission that is for administrative purposes. All right, so we bypassed the TCC, but what about the SSH keys, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, credentials, etc.? That's another good news for you. There are by default stored in home directory, which is not protected by the TCC. So you don't even have to care about it. All right, so that was the last step, and we have taken over the macOS machine. And because I don't want to leave you without any recommendations, there are 6 that I know that implementing all these mechanisms is a process, but there are the 6 points that you at least have to implement in the infrastructures. So the first one, I know they're really obvious, but I repeat it every talk about macOS security. So enroll your Macs to MDM. You need to centralizedly manage those Macs, right? Keep them updated. As you can see, Macs have 0 days, have vulnerabilities. You have to update your Macs. Enforce policies like system integrity protection. For example, without system integrity protection, you can elevate your privileges to root. You can bypass the TCC, or maybe not even bypass, because if SIP is disabled, there is even no TCC. The TCC is disabled too as well. Enforce firewall, gatekeeper, which makes sure that all the applications are notarized before opening. File vault, which is responsible for encryption, etc., etc. I bet that nowadays, when you have a macOS environment, people do not use word macros mostly, because they are quite limited comparing to Windows macros. So if your company doesn't use macros on Macs, you can disable it globally. Install an anti-malware solution, because as you can see, as you could see during the doc, there is malware for Macs. And because of the 0 days, monitor your Mac machines. They are not 100% secure if you follow the first 5 steps. And if you'd like to verify your macOS environment security or do a red teaming scenarios in your infrastructure, you can hire us to do that. All right, so summing up. That will be the quickest sum up ever. Macs, like other machines, can be infected. If you have Macs in your machine, if you have Mac machines in your environment, don't make them a blind spot, not seen by your socks. Thank you very much.